トビデオ
I talk a lot about how the 80s to early 90s were this sort of golden age for the big budget OVA. It was not only the era where that format of anime came into being and flourished, but it was also the era where studios were ready and willing to pour money into more daring projects. But because OVAs were a popular format to tell stories that were either too short for TV or just not TV friendly in general, it meant that a lot of them were produced. And since there's only so much money that can go around in the Japanese animation industry, OVA titles produced on less than stellar budgets were an inevitability. These are the OVAs you don't hear about as much, the cheap cash-ins, the filler material designed to take up shelf space, the titles that, while they may have started with lofty ambitions, never reached their true potential thanks to the limitations of their lowly budget. And today, we'll be covering a bargain bin classic, an 80s OVA with zero budget that, in some circles, has become a classic in its own right.
For some reason, living on this planet has inspired me to be more creative. This humanoid should be finished when you return 1 year from now.
1986's The Humanoid is a lot, but I'll try to adhere to brevity. The anime centers around the titular humanoid, Antoinette. She was created by Dr. Watson, gifted scientist and leader of a human colony situated on the peaceful garden world of Lazeria. Living alongside the humans are the alien but still human-looking Megalosians. While relations between the two races are good, the exceptionally 80s-looking bad guy of the anime, Governor Proud, wants to put those relations in jeopardy by trying to bring the Megalosian princess back to her home planet for some reason. And he intends to do this with an ancient starship called Ixion, a powerful transport that harnesses a dangerous, unstable power. Caught in the middle of all this are two spaceship operators, Alan and Eric, who have just returned from a mission to Earth. Eric is the fiancé of Dr. Watson's daughter, Sherry, and the two of them want to spend some time together before Eric has to go back to another Earth mission. They allow Antoinette to accompany them on their romantic frolics, which results in certain feelings the robot wasn't programmed to feel to start blossoming.
Alan, tell me, doesn't your databank have a record of these images?
Yes. But human emotions such as love are impossible to convert into computer data.
Oh?
And as for Alan, he loves coffee.
It's only memories of Earth and the rich smell of this coffee that keeps my spirits up. At least we'll reach our destination soon.
And I mean loves coffee. But Eric, Sherry, and Antoinette end up getting caught in the middle of Proud's nefarious plan and, well, things happen. The Humanoid is a true treat of an OVA. It's cheesy, extremely 80s, and is astonishing in how many ways it does everything wrong. The story structure is wrong. The dialogue is wrong. The animation is wrong. The blocking is wrong. The lighting is wrong. It's honestly remarkable how many things they screw up in just a 45-minute runtime. And you know what? I love it. Other low-tier 80s OVAs have left me with a multiplicity of feelings. California Crisis left me feeling underwhelmed that its creative use of aesthetic failed to uplift its own paper-thin narrative. Wounded Man bored me to tears when it wasn't filling me with visceral disgust. But The Humanoid gives me nothing but joy. If you ever plan to make a hobby/living out of talking about old anime, in which case stop now and get off my turf, you will appreciate anime like The Humanoid. It is the type of anime that uses its storytelling elements so poorly that you learn to appreciate anime that uses their elements well. Anime like The Humanoid are the whetstone by which one sharpens their critical skills. And since said skills pays the bills, let's say we crack open this hyper 80s sci-fi cheese factory and see what exactly makes it stink so good. Now, before I begin the critical drubbing of a 30-plus-year-old anime, I should point out in the interest of fairness that there is some actual talent behind The Humanoid. The anime was produced by Kaname Production, a small artist collective that ultimately shuttered in 1988, but not before producing some small yet notable OVA titles such as Windaria and Letta, The Fantastic Adventures of Yoko. They also did Dream Dimension Hunter Fandora, but we don't have to talk about that. Character and mechanical designs were done by Shohei Kohara, who is mostly known in the Transformers fandom for taking the toy models and translating them into the templates that would form the basis of the designs used in the cartoons and comics. But the biggest name attached to the humanoid would be the guy who designed Antoinette herself, Hajime Sorayama. Most people might not know who exactly Hajime Sorayama is, but they've definitely come across his work once or twice in their life. You know those sexy, airbrushed pinups of hot robot women that were made in the 80s, the kind that tends to be found on college dorm room posters or rock album covers? That was him. And I guess that would explain why Antoinette looks to be the most visually striking thing in this entire anime, while everyone else just looks so generically 80s. By the way, I checked and Sorayama doesn't seem to have this anime listed on his official resume. I think if there was one person you could probably shift the blame towards, it would be the director, Shinichi Masaki. Now, Masaki is actually a fairly competent director, having directed episodes for anime such as Code Geass and Girls on Panzer. But the humanoid was his directorial debut, and it shows. A lot of the mistakes this anime makes are that of someone who was just thrown into the director's chair without warning and forced to forge an anime into something consumable. We all start somewhere, but I think this production probably would have been a lot more salvageable if they had not given it to a person whose previous credits at Konami were production advancement and literature manager. As tradition dictates, let's start with the animation. You watch a few seconds of the humanoid, and at first glance, it doesn't seem that particularly awful. Nothing to write home about, but also not a complete amateurish hack job. But that's the benefit of getting just a slice of this animation. Once you actually watch the whole thing, you'll find that the animation is remarkably inconsistent throughout. There will be very rare occasions of animation that has detail and weight behind it, particularly in action scenes, but spliced in between those smatterings of above average animation are scenes of some of the most basic ass sequences you ever did see on an OVA. This is some pre-TMS Saturday morning American cartoon tier animation. Repeated shots of keyframes where the only thing moving is the character's mouth, shots that are obviously a cell being moved across a background, and sequences with keyframes that were obviously done so fast and so loose they operate with zero weight and detail. The inconsistencies even spread to the color timing of the anime. So many scenes will just flip back and forth between two coloring schemes, like in a conversation between two characters at a table. One side will look like they're talking in the middle of the day, while the other side will look like they're talking around sunset. Or this scene where it just flips from a bright and vibrant color palette to a darker and duller one for no reason. But the animation is just small potatoes compared to the other technical problems the humanoid has, and it all stems from the direction. This is what I mean by Masaki making mistakes that showcase his own experience as a director. Let's start with the editing. When the editing of something is good, you barely notice. But when the editing of something is bad, you notice it all the time. A good philosophy to follow when editing together a picture is that you need to find a way to make the scenes flow seamlessly between one another. And the humanoid barely seems to do that. Take the scene where Eric and Alan first meet Antoinette. She's introducing herself to the two of them while Dr. Watson calls for her off screen. We then cut to an establishing shot of the location we were already in, before cutting to another scene where Antoinette is serving Alan coffee with Dr. Watson.
You make a fine cup of coffee. You've made my day.
I'm pleased you like it, Alan.
We don't need that establishing shot because A, the location was already established in the last scene, and B, the next scene features Antoinette and Dr. Watson extensively, so you don't need the extra setup. It just makes the transitions between scenes clunky, and my guess that it was there in the first place was just to pad out the runtime. The shoddy editing even extends to the audio transitions. There are scenes where the audio fade-outs just feel off, like the crossfades are just too short to adequately transition to the next scene. Listen. Then there's the blocking. Anime is visual storytelling, and how a cut is blocked can make or break a scene, and the humanoid certainly leaves a lot of broken scenes in its wake. One reoccurring bad habit I noticed is that it will randomly have certain cuts be wide shots for whatever reason. Like here's a scene that's a conversation between Alec and Eric that they are having over coffee.
You taking your coffee break now, Alan?
Yeah, that's right.
It does the typical thing at first where they cut between the two when the others speak, like you would when you're blocking a conversation scene, then BAM! Unnecessary wide shot that does nothing to help emphasize the information given on screen. The only thing it does is just expose how bare bones the interior of the spaceship is, as well as have the eyes of the audience drawn to the lighting error at the upper right corner. Even in scenes that are setting up the emotional crux of the whole anime are hobbled by poor staging. So the love triangle between Eric, Sherry, and Antoinette needs to be set up, and this is done by having Antoinette join in on an intimate moment between the couple. However, instead of establishing this plot point with a medium 2 shot that becomes a 3 shot with Antoinette entering the frame, it's another wide shot. There's no reason why we need all the space to establish what is supposed to be an intimate love triangle, and the way the camera is angled makes what's supposed to be a close moment detached and voyeuristic. If I didn't know any better, I'd say they chose this direction just because the far away, less detailed models of the characters are just easier to animate like finger puppets. But funnily enough, for all of its problems technically, the story actually has potential. As cliche as romantic triangles have become over the past couple of decades, they can still work if they're done right. And a romantic triangle that involves 2 humans and a robot who is suddenly feeling feelings that she was not programmed to feel is certainly a novel concept. And all of this set against a backdrop involving a villain trying to harness the power of long-lost alien technology, you got yourself a recipe for a decent, if fairly typical sci-fi romp. But the problem is that you have 2 big plot lines running concurrently with each other in an anime that's less than an hour. Anime with similar runtimes such as Call Me Tonight or even to a very lesser extent California Crisis are able to handle their storylines with a short runtime because their plots are fairly straightforward. The Humanoid, wanting to be both a planetary sci-fi romp and romantic love triangle narrative, should have 2, maybe 3 full-length episodes to properly juggle these 2 narratives and give them an equal amount of focus. But with just less than an hour of runtime, mostly devoted to characters imbibing coffee.
Oh, this coffee tastes great!
The princess loves all the flavors of Earth.
The whole plot of Governor Proud and his incomprehensible starship plan gets a disproportionate amount of time devoted to it over the other plot involving Antoinette. You know, the character this anime is named after? And for much time as they devote to it, that whole plot actually feels very half-assed. There's an attempt to build some mystery around Proud and his motivations, but I think the fact that he dresses up like Space Jareth removes a lot of the intrigue. And even though his overall plan is centered around the princess of his home planet, she is barely a player in this anime. She barely has any character to speak of, or any lines for that matter, and her advisor tends to do most of the speaking for her. And she just disappears halfway through the anime. Not only does she get 0 screen time after being thrown into prison by Proud, but I think Proud himself forgets about how she figures into his plan and just decides he wants to revive the ancient starship just because he's mad with power. By the way, despite knowing that reviving this ancient starship will unleash this planetary destroying power, our heroes don't seem to be in that big a hurry to stop Proud. They only really come across the plan after Eric stumbles into it, and even after fighting off robot baddies and Proud revealing his ultimate plan that they all know will completely vaporize the very terra firma they are currently standing on, the best resistance they can offer up to Proud is, "Are you sure you want to do this?"
You don't have to do this. It's still not too late to change your mind, Governor.
We will proceed as planned.
And then Proud, predictably, ends up blowing himself up. If he had spent less time reviving ancient starships and more time drinking coffee, he'd probably still be alive.
Things just seem to happen to people who don't drink Wilkins.
But I, like the anime itself, am ignoring the thing people came here to see, the love triangle. And if you think I'm complaining about the lack of focus given to the love triangle because it's this anime's saving grace, then I encourage you to wake up and smell the Folgers because it is also poorly written, possibly even more than Proud's plot. First, the whole thing about Antoinette falling in love with Eric is set up way too quickly. There's no real build up to it, it's just that knowing this guy and his vicious mullet for a few hours, she has fallen deeply, madly in love. This plotline is obviously a victim of the short runtime because at no point do we get any time alone with Antoinette, have her parse her thoughts about these strange new feelings she was not programmed to feel. Even when she saves Eric near the end, it mostly just comes off as just saving everyone along with Eric, not just Eric himself. The romance between her and Eric, despite the story telling us it's there, doesn't appear to actually be there. But to be fair, it's not like the writers did much with the romance we actually did see.
Is there something on your mind?
Well, I was wondering if you'd... marry me?
Sparks. The only real romance in this anime is between Alan and his cup of Colombian roast.
A little bitter, but still an excellent blend.
Which brings me to the ending. With Proud's ancient starship power source reducing him to mere atoms, the whole damn thing has gone out of control. And it's at this moment that Antoinette has a sudden change of heart, or epiphany, and decides that she really never could have Eric's love. But in order to prove that she really does love him, she's willing to sacrifice herself to save Eric and the planet they are currently on. Now this is the moment that really plays up the pathos. You've got this earnest 80s monster ballad playing in the background, which is titled, I Shit You Not, Power of Love. The way the camera lingers on every part of Antoinette as she absorbs all the energy from the starship to save the planet. It starts raining. They even have Antoinette shed a single tear as her last act before going offline forever. A moment that's ruined by the editor's decision to put an inappropriate shine sound effect to it. All this pathos for a romance that was barely there. I don't even think Eric was aware that Antoinette loved him at all. He just saw her as a helpful maid or something. The more I think about it, the more this love triangle thing feels like an excuse for Antoinette to sacrifice herself in that big, pathos-laden climax. But considering how little time they spend building towards that climax, the absurd degrees they go to try and jerk whatever tears the audience have just does not happen. And then they try to tack on a theme about how a machine could feel love at the very end through a text scroll. I don't think so, anime. You don't state your thesis in the conclusion of your essay. Boy, the Humanoid sure is a mess, huh? It's one of the worst animated, worst paced, and worst told stories I have ever seen in 80s anime, and I love it to bits. We always need to cover these types of anime on Kyoto Video every now and again, because we need to know that the golden age was not always that golden, and the Humanoid is probably one of the best examples of that, and I encourage everyone to watch it. It's bad, but beautifully so. The type of anime you can either study to see what exactly went wrong, or laugh along with casually. It's one of the most easily watchable pieces of cheap, unapologetically 80s crap you have ever seen, and believe me when I say that's saying a lot. The Humanoid is, in the purest definition, so bad it's good. Just as bad as good as this steaming cup of coffee I have right here. It's good coffee.
Boy, you should switch to decaf.
Oh, you can fall in love.